I thought I had moved on from my first love after a clean break, but 3 days before my wedding, I received a video of her passionately kissing her ex-boyfriend. Even her mother called me, not to apologize for the betrayal, but to demand I delete my Facebook post so they wouldn't become the laughingstock of the town. I told them the wedding was off, stripping away their last bit of dignity while Olivia and her ex tried to claim it was just a game of truth or dare. I threw her luggage out of the house immediately, realizing that this was only the beginning of the drama and the long overdue karma for her twisted family. Just 3 days before our wedding, I received a video of my fiancée, Olivia, passionately kissing her ex-boyfriend. I didn't lose my mind or call her screaming in a fit of rage. Instead, I posted the video directly to my Facebook for everyone we know to see, effectively giving her and her ex my blessing in the most public way possible. My caption was simple and direct, stating that the wedding was canceled and I wanted to let everyone know before they made the trip to New York. My feed exploded instantly, but Olivia only panicked once the secret was out. She tried to downplay it by claiming it was just a harmless game with friends and accused me of overreacting. As soon as I set my phone down, it started vibrating with a call from Olivia's mother, Mrs. Davis. She was fuming and anxious the moment I answered, demanding to know what I was thinking with that Facebook post. She ordered me to delete it immediately, arguing that making a scene like this would only make me look bad in the end. She insisted that the wedding must proceed as planned because she refused to let her family become a neighborhood punchline. I let out a sharp, cold laugh and told her firmly that since her daughter decided to cheat, the wedding was dead. I suggested she spend her time coming up with a good story for the neighbors, because if she didn't, the gossip around town was going to be brutal. Mrs. Davis went ballistic, her screeching voice nearly shattering my eardrums as she accused me of trying to ruin Olivia's life. I didn't stick around for the rest of her hysterical rant and hung up the phone. I ignored her subsequent calls because I knew that once a line like this is crossed, there is no going back. I eventually gave my parents a brief summary of the situation and told them my mind was made up about the cancellation. I wasn't acting on a whim. I was perfectly rational, and they didn't push for details, choosing instead to support me. They spent the rest of the evening on the phone with family and friends, quietly handling the fallout of the announcement. About an hour later, Olivia burst through the front door, gasping for air as she slumped against the frame. Her face was flushed deep red, though I couldn't tell if it was from the alcohol or the frantic run over here. She looked at me and demanded to know if I was actually serious about calling off the marriage. I looked at her with a completely blank expression and asked if my Facebook post had been too subtle for her. I felt a surge of bitterness rising in my chest, but I forced it down and kept my composure. I told her that if she couldn't understand a simple announcement, she might need to go back to school, because as far as I was concerned, we were finished. My mind drifted to her ex, Jerry Hudson, who had started hanging around again a few months ago. People had warned me that their vibe was off, but I had brushed it off as mindless gossip. I figured we were all adults and that nobody actually held onto a flame for a high school sweetheart that long. It turns out I was the fool, the naive joke of the story. I actually bought into the lie that two people who were once obsessed with each other could remain just friends after a breakup. I realized then that if an ex keeps circling back in your life, it is only a matter of time before old feelings resurface and things cross the line. Thinking about all the years and emotion I had invested in her, I could only let out a heavy sigh of regret for the wasted time. I nudged the suitcase at my feet with my shoe, looking at it with nothing but pure disgust. Seeing Olivia standing there with her messy hair and smeared makeup only made the anger inside me burn hotter. I told her in a voice as cold as ice that since there was no wedding, she had no business living in my house anymore. I pointed to the luggage I'd already packed for her, making it clear that she needed to leave. Olivia, who usually carried herself with such arrogance, actually looked shaken, clearly surprised by how decisively I was cutting her out. She started whining, begging me to listen to her explanation and claiming it was just a stupid game where a kiss meant nothing. I shot back with a sarcastic sneer, asking if that meant I could go around kissing other women or having game-related hookups whenever I felt like it. My voice was sharper and more biting than I had intended, and it left Olivia momentarily stunned. After a few seconds of awkward silence, she flipped the script and started accusing me of being unreasonable. She had the audacity to tell me that I needed to look at the context of the situation instead of just judging her. I couldn't believe she was calling me unreasonable or talking about context while trying to justify her infidelity. She spoke with such conviction that you would think cheating was a perfectly logical mistake that deserved sympathy. Honestly, if she put this much effort into a career instead of making excuses, she probably would have been a successful lawyer by now. A cold laugh escaped my lips as I processed her ridiculous arguments. I sneered at her and tossed a bag of her clothes at her feet, telling her that if this was her best excuse, then we were truly finished. My tone left no room for negotiation because I was done listening to her lies. Olivia finally lost her cool, falling back into her old pattern of acting like the victim whenever we fought. She screamed at me, asking how I could be so cruel after we had worked so hard to get to the wedding day. She was more worried about her reputation and her future marriage prospects than the fact that she had betrayed me. She tried to scramble for an explanation about her and Jerry, her eyes wide with desperation. She argued that if they were actually going to get back together, they would have done it years ago. Then she had the nerve to say that in a bar setting, a kiss during truth or dare was just a standard penalty and that she didn't understand why I was making such a fuss. At that exact moment, it clicked why we were never going to work out. To her, making out with another man, especially a frenemy like Jerry, was nothing more than a game. I realized then that if being loyal made me old-fashioned, I was perfectly happy being out of style. I wonder what would come next. Maybe she would tell me a child wasn't mine and call a modern lifestyle or an open relationship. Any lingering hope I had for us died right then and there. I grabbed the rest of her things and hauled them out to the hallway, my adrenaline making the heavy lifting feel effortless. Olivia grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading as she asked why I couldn't just be more forgiving. Her voice was trembling as she promised to never speak to Jerry again if I would just drop it. I ripped my arm away, but before I could respond, I heard Jerry Hudson's voice echoing down the hall, claiming that I was blowing things out of proportion and that they were just friends. I wish more than anything that it was all a misunderstanding, but I couldn't ignore what I had seen with my own eyes. I cursed my sharp vision and the fact that my phone hadn't broken before I saw that video. When Jerry walked into view, Olivia's expression shifted instantly, looking at him like he was her savior while still trying to look like the victim. Olivia told Jerry to explain everything to me and confirm that nothing had actually happened between them. Jerry casually draped his arm over her shoulder, giving her a look so tender it made me sick before turning to me with a fake smile. He told me that if I didn't believe it was just a game, he could take me to the bar to prove that the kiss was the extent of it and that I was being petty for holding a grudge. He paused and tried to play the role of the peacemaker, offering me an apology on Olivia's behalf and claiming it was all his fault for starting the game. I couldn't believe their definition of nothing happening was a full-blown makeout session. I wondered if they thought a betrayal only counted if I caught them in bed together. Jerry looked sorry on the surface, but when Olivia wasn't looking, he gave me a look of pure, smug provocation. The rage I had been bottling up finally reached its breaking point. I threw a punch that landed squarely on his jaw, sending him stumbling back until he hit the floor. Olivia rushed to Jerry's side with a look of intense concern before glaring up at me with pure hatred. She screamed that no matter how angry I was, I had no right to take it out on Jerry. She demanded that I apologize to him immediately, claiming he was just trying to help and that I was the one being violent for no reason. Seeing them huddled together on the floor against me, the reality of the situation finally sank in. In their twisted version of the story, they were the innocent victims and I was the villain. According to their logic, I was just being petty and should have been big enough to shrug off the fact that my fiancé was kissing another man. Maybe some men could stomach that kind of disrespect, but I wasn't one of them. If that made me narrow-minded, then so be it. I closed my eyes and refused to waste another breath on these two cheaters because I knew that if I stayed, I might do something that would land me in jail. It wasn't worth throwing away my future over people as disposable as them. Memories of our time together hit me all at once like a sudden summer storm. We had met at a friend's wedding back in Chicago where she was a bridesmaid and I was a groomsman. We were both fresh out of college and just starting to figure out our professional lives. Our friends kept teasing us about how good we looked together and suggesting we should just start dating already. We both laughed it off at the time, but that was the day our story quietly began. Back then, my father had just placed me in one of the smaller branches of the Miller Group to learn the ropes of the family business. Olivia happened to be working at that same branch, and over time, we grew closer until a relationship finally took root. During our third year together, she opened up about a serious boyfriend she had back in college. She claimed they had a mutual breakup simply because long distance wasn't working after graduation. I didn't think much of it at the time, since everyone has a past. A few years later, marriage seemed like the natural next step for us. Looking back now, I wonder if I was ever more than just a rebound or a tool to help her get over Jerry Hudson. That thought alone was enough to make me feel physically sick. I felt completely hollow that night as I drove back to my parents' place in the suburbs. I was in a daze the whole way, replaying the day's events over and over in my mind like a bad movie. It still felt surreal that she expected me to believe a game could justify her making out with another man. When I walked in, my mother immediately pulled me into a hug and told me that I didn't have to explain a thing. She assured me that it wasn't my fault and that they had already handled the calls to the rest of the family. She told me to ignore any gossip that might come our way because they were standing firmly behind my decision. She reminded me that life is full of ups and downs and that everyone takes their turn being the subject of town gossip. Her comfort was exactly what I needed, and I felt tears stinging my eyes as the weight of the situation hit me. I apologized for putting them through all of this drama, my voice thick with guilt. My father walked out of the kitchen with a plate of fresh roast beef, clearly trying to lighten the mood. He joked about how this was far from the first time they had to bail me out of mess. He brought up an old story about how I broke my grandmother's favorite bracelet and how he took the fall for it, getting a lecture that lasted all afternoon. His story made me smile as I remembered all the trouble I used to get into as a kid, feeling a mix of nostalgia and sadness. My mom jumped in with another story about the time I ruined my sister's favorite dress, laughing about how long it took to stop her from crying. As they shared these old memories, the tension in the room finally began to fade away. I realized then that this was just part of growing up and that my parents had always been my safety net. No matter how many times I messed up or caused trouble, they were always there to help me pick up the pieces. Looking at the lines on their faces, I felt a sharp pang of regret for letting them down. I truly thought I had finally found a woman they would be proud to call a daughter-in-law. Instead, I had brought this scandal to their doorstep just days before the wedding and disappointed them once more. I knew that my decision to cancel the wedding would spark a firestorm of gossip among our social circle. Despite that, my parents were out there defending me and calmly explaining the situation to anyone who called. I made a silent vow to myself to make it up to them and to never let them worry about my life like this again. The next morning, the Davis family showed up at our house unannounced while we were in the middle of breakfast. Mrs. Davis looked momentarily guilty when she saw my mother, but she quickly masked it with a fake, overly cheerful greeting. She acted as if nothing was wrong, trying to force a sense of normalcy into the room. She started talking about my Facebook post, dismissively calling it an impulsive mistake on my part. Her tone was a calculated mix of subtle blame and self-preservation. I sat there wondering if there was even a single shred of honesty in anything she was about to say. She claimed she had given Olivia a stern talking to, and that Olivia had promised to cut off all contact with Jerry Hudson. Then, she tentatively asked if we could proceed with the wedding in 2 days as originally planned. She kept her voice low, but her eyes were searching mine with desperate hope. My mother rubbed her temples as if she had a sudden migraine and told Mrs. Davis that she wished they had spoken sooner. She explained that she had already spent the entire night calling every single guest to tell them the event was off. With a heavy sigh, she told them that some things just aren't meant to be and it was time to let the wedding go. Mrs. Davis started to panic, arguing that Lucas and Olivia were a perfect match and that it was far too early to talk about fate. My mother turned a sharp, disgusted gaze toward Olivia and remarked that after seeing the video, it was clear Olivia had no real desire to be part of the Miller family. The air in the room turned ice cold the moment those words left her mouth. Olivia's face went pale, and she suddenly dropped to her knees right there in the breakfast nook. She begged my mother for forgiveness, swearing she would never see Jerry again and promising to stay home and take care of her forever. She even tried to bribe her with the promise of cooking her favorite lasagna every day, sounding completely desperate. My mother let out a long sigh and told Olivia that there are plenty of people in the world who can cook a decent lasagna. She made it clear that she only intended to have one daughter-in-law in her life, and that position was definitely no longer open to Olivia. Those words seemed to break Olivia completely, and she just sat there on the floor as the tears began to flow. A loud crack echoed through the room as Mrs. Davis suddenly slapped Olivia across the face. She hissed at her daughter to apologize to her mother-in-law, her voice a frantic mix of rage and sheer panic. You could see the desperate, helpless look in her eyes as she realized her plans were falling apart. Olivia was stunned for a moment before she started wailing uncontrollably, throwing her arms around my mother's legs. She sobbed that she was truly sorry and promised to be a perfect, obedient wife, if only she could be forgiven. Her face was a complete mess of tears and snot as she begged for a second chance. She kept repeating that she would be good to me and begged my mother not to hate her. Mrs. Davis quickly chimed in, arguing that major life decisions shouldn't be left to impulsive young people and that mistakes were a normal part of growing up. She tried to frame it as a minor hurdle that the parents should help them overcome together. My mother straightened her back, exuding an air of absolute authority that commanded the room. She cut Mrs. Davis off with a gaze as cold as ice, telling her to stop using familial terms because that relationship was officially over. There was a finality in her voice that left no room for further argument. She stated plainly that she would never, under any circumstances, allow Olivia to marry into the Miller family. She told them to drop the act because the drama wasn't going to change her mind. She added a biting remark about how a woman who doesn't know how to conduct herself was someone our family simply couldn't afford to associate with. My mother's quiet but overwhelming strength completely silenced the Davis women. Having spent decades in the corporate world, she had seen every trick, manipulation, and fake display of emotion in the book. Realizing her performance had failed miserably, Mrs. Davis's face twisted in anger, and she actually kicked Olivia a couple of times in frustration. She hissed at her daughter, calling her a useless embarrassment who did nothing but cause trouble for the family. She glared at Olivia with a mixture of hatred and profound disappointment, wondering aloud where she had learned to be so pathetic. I simply watched in silence as the two of them made a humiliated retreat from our home. I realized I should have listened to my parents' advice to have the big wedding first and worry about the legal paperwork later. If we hadn't rushed to get the marriage license signed, I wouldn't be stuck in this legal mess right now. I had thought Olivia's mother was the peak of the family's toxicity, but I was about to find out just how wrong I was. It turned out I was still incredibly naive about what they were capable of. On what was supposed to be the day before the wedding, Mrs. Davis showed up at the Miller Group headquarters and dropped to her knees in front of all my colleagues. The spectacle was so sudden and bizarre that I stood there completely stunned, trying to figure out what her angle was this time. I realized she was trying to use a public display of submission to trap me into a corner. She was a sobbing mess, begging me to reconsider for the sake of our families. She said she was willing to give up on the wedding ceremony as long as I promised not to go through with the divorce. Between her gasping sobs, she put on a performance of pure, calculated desperation. She wailed about how Olivia's reputation was already trashed and how no respectable man would ever marry her now that the story of her and Jerry was all over town. I knew that her desperation had nothing to do with Olivia's honor and everything to do with her own bank account. Olivia had a younger brother who had been the spoiled center of their household since the day he was born. Mrs. Davis was constantly calculating how to use Olivia's marriage to secure a comfortable lifestyle for her precious son. She was hoping I would provide him with a high-paying, low-effort job at the Miller Group. I could only sneer at how transparent her motives were. I told Mrs. Davis to get off the floor, keeping my voice as steady as possible. I made it clear that Olivia and I were finished for good. I pointed out that Jerry Hudson was doing well for himself these days, so she should probably just let Olivia be with the man she actually wanted to be with. I suggested that would be a happy ending for everyone involved. The moment I mentioned Jerry's financial success, her eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. I remembered then that the only reason she had forced Olivia to break up with Jerry years ago was because he hadn't been wealthy enough for her taste back then. Even though the idea of Jerry's money tempted her, she quickly insisted that he still couldn't compare to the Miller family legacy. She was determined to have me as her son-in-law regardless of how I felt about her daughter. Realizing she was completely deaf to reason, I decided to end the conversation with no more room for politeness. I told her to leave the building immediately or I would have security escort her out. She just sneered, claiming that security wouldn't touch her because this was a private family matter. She felt invincible, thinking no one would dare arrest an old lady for making a scene. I felt a wave of frustration because I knew she was right about security being hesitant to intervene in a family squabble. However, I leaned in and whispered a few choice words into her ear that changed her attitude instantly. She shot up from the floor, her face darkening with a look of pure, venomous hatred. She walked away without saying another word, not even looking back at me. Her weakness was incredibly easy to exploit. It was always about her precious son. The only reason she had swallowed her pride and knelt was the hope that the Miller Group would eventually provide her son with a high-status career. As soon as I mentioned that I could ensure her son never worked a day in this industry, she panicked and retreated. To her, the identity of her son-in-law was irrelevant as long as they had deep pockets. Watching her flee the office, I felt a fleeting moment of pity for Olivia, realizing that being raised by a woman like that was its own kind of curse. At that moment, I was just incredibly grateful that the wedding was off. I was even more thankful that we didn't have any children to complicate the split. If we did, I have no doubt Mrs. Davis would have used them as pawns to extort me for the rest of my life. I ran into Olivia again as I was leaving the office that evening. She looked small and lonely standing there in the fading sunlight, but I didn't feel a single spark of sympathy for her. She asked if we could talk, her voice tight with a tension she was clearly trying to hide. I just shook my head, exhausted by how persistent this family was. I asked her what was left to say besides the details of our legal separation. Her voice trembled as she tried to feed me the same tired line about how the night with Jerry was just a big misunderstanding. I had absolutely zero interest in hearing her lies anymore. I looked her in the eye and asked if she really thought I was stupid enough to believe her accident story. I told her she must have been watching too many soap operas if she thought that excuse would fly with me. I made it clear that I wasn't the kind of man to wait around for a second or third betrayal. The risk was simply too high for me to stomach. I told her flat out that I didn't want to spend my life raising children who might not even be my own. I told her that I might have actually respected her if she had just been honest about who she was and what she wanted. Instead, she chose to hide behind lies and games. My bluntness clearly rattled her, and she couldn't even look me in the eye as she searched for a response. Realizing that her pleas weren't working, she shifted gears and started throwing a full-blown tantrum. She shrieked at me to just forget about that night, as if it were some minor disagreement. Her voice was getting louder with every sentence, drawing stares from people passing by on the sidewalk. She actually had the nerve to try and blame me for the situation we were in. She argued that if I hadn't been so impulsive and canceled the wedding, we would already be living happily as a married couple. I was genuinely stunned that she could be so delusional as to ignore her own actions and blame the fallout on me. I couldn't believe anyone could just delete reality from their mind like that. If she was going to pretend the truth didn't exist, there was no point in even having a conversation. I felt my anger flare up again at her sheer audacity. I told her that her attempt to twist the story was both pathetic and disgusting. I pointed out that by canceling the wedding, I was essentially giving her exactly what she seemed to want, Jerry Hudson. I asked her why she was crying when she was finally free to be with the man she was kissing behind my back. Her bravado vanished instantly, and her face went paper white as she realized her manipulation had failed. She stammered that she had always loved me, her eyes darting around in a desperate search for a way out. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying my best to stay composed. I looked back into her desperate eyes and thought about all the years I had spent being a devoted partner. I had always gone out of my way to be faithful and avoid even the appearance of impropriety because I didn't want her to feel insecure. Unlike many men in my position, I had never cheated or played games with her heart. I had prioritized building a life with her and giving her the security of a stable future. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the legal separation and annulment papers I had prepared. I told her to look them over and have her lawyer contact mine if she had any issues with the terms. Olivia's hands were shaking so much she could barely take the documents from me. I eventually just shoved them in her grasp and walked away without a second glance. I had come to terms with the fact that if a woman is determined to be unfaithful, there is nothing a man can do to stop her. It was better to cut ties now than to wait for the next time she decided to humiliate me. If you can't hold on to something, it's better to just open your hand and let it go. The next day, I received a text from her saying the papers were signed and she would see me in court to finalize everything. A massive sense of relief washed over me as I realized this messy chapter of my life was finally closing. The wedding was officially a thing of the past, and by now, everyone in town knew exactly why. Over the next month, I heard rumors that Mrs. Davis was already pressuring Olivia to get back together with Jerry Hudson for financial reasons. On the very day our annulment was finalized, Olivia went straight to the courthouse and married Jerry. When I heard the news, I didn't feel anything at all except a faint sense of amusement. I even went as far as to have a mutual friend pass along a polite, distant message of congratulations to the new couple. I was genuinely surprised when Olivia showed up at my office again just 2 months later. I was leaving late after a long day and saw her standing by the fountain in the plaza. She looked isolated and small under the streetlights, but I felt absolutely nothing for her. She greeted me with a tentative, hopeful tone, asking how I had been lately. I told her I was doing great and that I was thoroughly enjoying my newfound freedom. I didn't linger to chat and started heading toward the underground parking garage. Olivia trailed behind me, her eyes filling with tears as she struggled to keep up. She called out to me, announcing that she and Jerry were planning a big wedding reception soon. Then she blurted out that even though she knew I hated her, she still missed me terribly. She actually asked if we could try to start over from scratch. I stopped for a second, turned around, and simply offered my congratulations on her upcoming wedding. She looked devastated, insisting that she hadn't come there to brag or to hear me wish her well. I cut her off before she could start another one of her monologues. I asked her if she realized how ridiculous she sounded, chasing after her ex-husband while planning a wedding with another man. I told her that people like her never truly change their ways. I told her to get lost because I didn't want anyone thinking there was still something between us. I made it clear that I had no interest in being the other man in the messy drama she called a life. Those words hit her like a physical blow, and all the energy seemed to drain out of her. She began muttering to herself as if she were in a trance, saying how much she regretted losing me. She promised that if I gave her even the slightest sign, she would call off the wedding with Jerry Hudson so we could run away together. She tried to explain away the night of the video, claiming she didn't know how things had escalated with Jerry. She insisted that she had tried to reject him at first, but his persistent messages and calls had slowly worn her down. Her voice trailed off into a pathetic whisper as she continued her regretful wife routine. I looked at her and felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I was completely finished with her performances and the endless drama that followed her everywhere. I told her I had heard enough and that I had zero interest in her tragic monologues. I reminded her that we were divorced and that she needed to stop seeking me out. I told her that being an adult means living with the consequences of your choices, including the choice to keep responding to Jerry's messages. I made it clear that I wasn't the type of person to make the same mistake twice. I told her that her moral compass was completely broken and that I had no intention of letting her drag me back into her mess. I walked away and left her crying alone in the dark parking lot. Olivia eventually went through with the big wedding reception with Jerry Hudson as planned. On my end, I was introduced to a woman named Jenny Carter through some mutual friends. Jenny was a brilliant and successful fashion designer whose work was sought after by celebrities all over the country. She was elegant, talented, and had a presence that was absolutely captivating. Jenny's parents were incredibly welcoming and didn't care at all about my past divorce. They treated me with genuine respect and warmth, which made me feel truly at home with their family. Their kindness helped me realize just how special what I had with Jenny was. I assumed I would never see Olivia Davis again for the rest of my life. However, about a year later, I was at a clinic in Los Angeles with Jenny for one of her prenatal appointments. As we were walking toward the main entrance, I heard a massive argument breaking out near the fountain. I looked up and saw Olivia and Jerry in the middle of a screaming match. They were both red in the face and clearly didn't care who was watching. Olivia was shouting at Jerry that if this round of fertility treatments didn't work, she was done with the marriage. She screamed about how she couldn't take another day of his mother's insults regarding her inability to conceive. Jerry just sneered at her, asking if she suddenly thought she was too good for him. He mocked her, asking who she thought would want to marry a 3-time divorcee. He reminded her that another divorce would make her a social pariah that no man would touch. He called her damaged goods and told her she should be grateful that he was willing to stay with her at all. Every word he spoke seemed designed to cut her as deeply as possible. Olivia was so enraged that she slapped him across the face, screaming that she never wanted to marry him in the first place. She finally blurted out the truth, that Jerry had been the one to leak the video to me to ruin our engagement. The mystery of how that video reached my message was finally solved. Jerry just laughed even harder, mocking her for still being obsessed with me. He told her that if she wanted a divorce so badly, he was more than happy to give it to her. Jenny and I walked right past them just as the argument reached its peak. I kept my focus on supporting Jenny as we walked by, and Olivia and Jerry were too busy screaming at each other to notice us. I later heard from some old acquaintances that their marriage had been a nightmare of failed fertility treatments and family pressure. They had spent a small fortune on doctors and specialists, but nothing worked for them. A few months after that public explosion at the clinic, Jerry's logistics firm was hit with a massive tax evasion investigation. The investigation quickly widened, revealing that Jerry and his partners had been running an illegal Ponzi scheme on the side. The entire company folded overnight, and Jerry was hauled off in handcuffs along with the rest of the executive team. It turned out that Olivia herself had been the whistleblower who tipped off the feds. She had been desperate for a divorce that Jerry wouldn't grant her. After a particularly bad night where he came home drunk and got violent, she decided to burn his whole world down. Olivia had reached her breaking point and filed the anonymous report that triggered the investigation. With Jerry behind bars, the court granted her a quick divorce, and she was finally free from the marriage she had come to loathe. Even after the divorce, her life didn't seem to improve much. I happened to see her again at a hospital in Philadelphia while I was taking my mother for a checkup. Once again, she was in the middle of a public spectacle, but this time her opponent was her own mother. I was starting to feel like a character in a bad video game, where every trip to the hospital triggered a scene of Olivia's life falling apart. Mrs. Davis was screaming at her daughter, telling her that she was going to marry a local businessman who had offered a $10,000 dowry. Olivia shrieked that the man was old enough to be their neighbor, Mr. Henderson's father. Her mother shot back that a 3-time divorcee had no right to be picky about who would take her in. She told Olivia she should be thanking God that anyone was willing to marry her at all. Mrs. Davis told her she was moving in with the man in 2 days and that there would be no wedding because it was a waste of money. She lamented her bad luck for being stuck with a daughter who did nothing but drain the family's resources. She called Olivia a disgrace to the family. Olivia snapped back, asking why her precious son wasn't the one taking her to medical appointments. She pointed out that she was the only one actually looking after her mother while the son was just waiting for her to die so he could inherit what little she had left. Mrs. Davis exploded in a fit of rage, lunging forward and grabbing Olivia by the hair. She screamed a string of insults, accusing her daughter of being ungrateful and wishing death upon her. She threatened to beat Olivia senseless for speaking ill of her brother. She screamed that her only hope had been for Olivia to marry into wealth so her son could get a high-level job. She blamed Olivia's affair with Jerry for ruining her son's chances at a career with the Miller Group. She called Olivia a curse on the family and blamed her for all their misfortunes. Olivia didn't back down, firing back with equally venomous words even as her mother pulled her hair. She told her mother that her useless brother was never getting a job at the Miller Group. She admitted that even if the wedding had happened, she would have kept that leech as far away from my family's business as possible. She also revealed that her brother had been involved in Jerry's illegal business and was now in prison himself. My mother and I stood a safe distance away, watching the two of them scream and claw at each other in the middle of the hospital corridor. I couldn't help but let out a small laugh at the sheer absurdity of the scene. My mother gave me a sharp, freezing look that silenced me immediately. I whispered to her that we should take the long way around to avoid getting caught in their crossfire. I eventually heard that some bystanders had to physically separate Olivia and her mother to end the fight. Following that day, Olivia reportedly cut all ties with her family and moved to a different country to start over. It made sense why she wanted to disappear, given her brother's vengeful nature. If he ever discovered that her whistleblowing on Jerry was what landed him in prison, there was no telling what he would do to her. She was likely just trying to find a place where she could finally feel safe. 30 years later, while Jenny and I were vacationing in Europe, we stopped at a small fusion restaurant for dinner. I looked up and realized our server was Olivia Davis. We recognized each other instantly, but neither of us said a word beyond the standard questions about the menu. Jenny leaned in and whispered, asking if that was indeed my ex-wife. I nodded and confirmed it was her, as there was no reason to lie about it after all this time. Jenny gave me a playful smile and joked about whether seeing her again made me want to rekindle our old romance for a happy ending. I held up my hands in mock surrender and told her to stop teasing an old man. I told her I was too old and tired to ever deal with that kind of drama again. Jenny laughed and said she was only kidding, though she jokingly added that she would give us her blessing if I really wanted to try. I told her the subject was officially closed and fed her a piece of the restaurant's chocolate cake. I told her it was actually quite good and she should try it. I reminded her that if I didn't take Olivia back when I was young and impulsive, I certainly wasn't going to do it now that I was old and happily settled. After that dinner, I never saw Olivia Davis again for the rest of my life. This story isn't about revenge. It's about the quiet dignity of walking away when you know your worth. Lucas didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't play games. He saw the truth, believed his own eyes, and chose himself over a lifetime of pretending. The hardest lesson here isn't about betrayal. It's about realizing that some people will never see what they did as wrong, and waiting for their apology is a waste of your life. Olivia spent years being passed between men and manipulated by her own family. Not because she was evil, but because she never learned to stand on her own. Lucas walked away once and never looked back, not out of bitterness, but because he understood that love without respect is just a trap. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't forgiving someone who hurt you. It's deciding that you deserve better and then proving it by living well. The best revenge isn't cruelty, it's peace. It's a good marriage, a happy child, and 30 years later, barely recognizing the face that once broke your heart. That's not forgetting. That's healing.